and I'd like to welcome everybody to this session on the 1st of August. And our first speakers for this evening are David and Sue Podger. David and Sue have been living in Bunbury in Western Australia for 5 years. They both became Baha'is in the 1950s. David in Australia and Sue in South Africa. Sue came to Australia at the end of the World Crusade years. In later years, they both served in the World Centre for 5 years. David installed the first computers at the World Centre. And these computers were used for accounting and word processing and document indexing. Sue is a watercolorist and has illustrated several of her daughter's books. David and Sue also pioneered in Papua New Guinea during the 9-year plan. And they taught the first believers in Papua. That's a story in itself. And there's now a temple is being built in the very city in which they were serving as pioneers. Now, David tonight is going to be speaking of his memories of Clara and Bahai Dunn and the years that were the final years of the World Crusade. So David and Sue, welcome to this evening's session. I hand over to you and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Graham. I'm just getting my thoughts together. You see, the Summe School property, which used to be the property of the Bolton family, was where I first was taken. I had been taught the faith for a whole year by Meg Degatati. Now can you see this picture that I'm looking at or not?
Yes, David, we can see the photo with you and Megan's photo.
Yes.
See you, but we can see.
Well, you see, many people won't today know Meg Degatati, but there she is with our daughter, Sharon. Sharon is now 60 years old. So that gives you the time that's passed. See, Meg taught me the faith, and she took about a year doing it. And her method of teaching, which worked with me, I don't think it would work with too many other people, because, you see, I had a love of classical music. In particular, I loved Bach. And Meg had a collection of Bach records on the old microgroove. And she had a wonderful collection of records of the St. Matthew Passion. Now that's pretty religious heavy stuff, but somehow it got through to me. And I think she played those to me just because of wanting to awaken a spiritual sensibility in me. And I think it probably worked. And anyway, towards the end of that year, she invited me to go to the 1956 summer school at the end of 1956. And so in those years, you went by a steam train from Central Station. And, you know, what the trouble with this presentation, Graham, is that I'm just looking at this fixed picture and I can't see any reactions from anyone in the audience. Mm-hmm. And I wish that this picture would go away and I could see a number of people and how they're responding. Do you mind doing that?
That's I think
that's good. Now I can see a few people. That's good. Lovely. So that's where I met the first Baha'is that I ever encountered, apart from Meg, and got to know them. I've written an article about that. It was in the Bulletin some time ago. I met people like Goré Georgic and Noel Blewett, Margaret Blewett, Fred Grant, other extraordinary people that you come across early in your Baha'i life. And you really get a sense of the of the strange variety of people that are Baha'is. And I also encountered Mother Dunn's healing hands, because I got a heavy cold and Meg took me off to Mother Dunn to be healed. And I didn't know what to expect. And dear Mother Dunn put her hands on me and said prayers. And eventually I rather cheekily asked her how many prayers it might take, you know. And she said she prayed until she was answered, which was a good reply. And then eventually, after a few more prayers, she sent me off to bed. And the next morning, she was waiting for me in the driveway on the walkway to breakfast. And I say waiting for me because she knew that she'd cured me. And so she says to me, and how are we this morning, my dear, you see? And it's then dawned on me that I was better. Just one of those strange things that happened, you know. You get a heavy cold, you're going to be stuck with it for a couple of weeks. And I wasn't. But I want to tell you another story about Mother Dunn to give you a different picture of her from an earlier time. So this is one of Meg's stories. You see, I was married to Meg, who taught me the faith, for 5 or 6 years. And then, sadly, she suddenly passed away. And I'll come to that story a bit later on. But for now, I want to explain this story of Meg, who used to go to the summer school with the young people, young Baha'is, and she'd get there very late and stay up talking to the young people. And ultimately, she went to her bed in one of the little huts they had there. And there was a big ant's nest in her bed. And she couldn't sleep in it, so she wondered what to do. It was 1 o'clock in the morning by now, and she saw the light on in Mother's little room. And she went off to there and said, Mother, to get her help, you see. And she said, Mother, there's ants in my bed. And Mother Dunn said to her, what time is it, dear? And she said, it's 1 o'clock. And, well, said Mother Dunn, go now, sluggard, consider its ways and be wise. And she chuckled, turned over in bed and turned off the light. Now, think about that. Could you produce a quote accurate out of Proverbs in the Old Testament off the bat? Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider its ways and be wise. Would you come up with a quote like that just on the instant? I don't think so. Mother Dunn was very sharp. She was intelligent. She was a clever woman. So, yes, from other stories, you might get the impression that she was just an old sweetie, but there was a lot more to her. And then at that summer school, I met Peter and Frank Kahn. At the end of this talk, I'm going to go through some photographs that I've got, We won't try and interpolate them here. Peter gave a wonderful series of talks about the life of Muhammad. When he came to the third or fourth talk, this was when Muhammad died. And Frank Khan, who'd been sitting through all this very quietly, just burst into tears at this story of the death of Muhammad. And you realize that you're engaging with people that are very serious, very connected with these stories that they're telling. And Frank jumped up and ran out of the room. He was so distressed. And then another thing I recall, I had a clock here somewhere. There we are. Another thing I recall is, you see, I was in a tent, in a stretcher for accommodation at that time. And dear Jim Heggie was at the school, but without his family because they were too young at that time. And so he was in the next stretcher. And after each session, I would have questions, you see. And Jim would answer me with quotations. He never would say what he thought. He just said, well, Baha'u'llah, on that subject that you're asking about, says the following, and he would recite from his own memory. And this was a wonderful way of teaching me, because I wasn't engaging with Jim. I was engaging directly with what Baha'u'llah had to say. And this went on for quite a while. Let me explain. We were in the pitch dark. So Jim wasn't referring to any piece of paper, but he was giving me the direct answers that I needed. As a consequence of that, you know, I think of Jim as my spiritual father, because Meg was my spiritual mother. She'd spent a solid year patiently teaching me the faith and leading me towards it. Meg had been involved in the acquisition of the land for the temple in Sydney. And people like Greta Lake had also been strongly involved and put a great deal of their resources into it. Ladies at that time in Australia had handbags, and the Bahai ladies had plenty of pamphlets in these handbags. And that was their main teaching method, was to empty out these handbags into various situations as needed. Now, Meg and I married, and you can see letters from the Guardian to me about the marriage, about the permission that had to be gotten from Meg's father, which all ultimately went through all right, and the Guardian wrote saying that's fine. But the Guardian made it clear through recounts that permission had to come in writing from him. Years later, when we were in Haifa, Ali Nakjavani asked me, did I have that original letter? I said yes. And so they persuaded me to hand it over, because it had to go into the collection of letters of the king that had gone to believers. They wanted the original.
And it was about not getting married in a church.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which Meg's father wanted.
That's right. But the strange thing was that when she said to him, "I've got a letter from Israel," he said, "Goodness me, that's a long way." and he caved in. Well, in my list here, I come to 1957, late in 57, November the 4th, when the beloved guardian passed away. I had been to Bahai for just 6 months. And so it was a big shock to me to see the reaction of the Baha'is. Poor Peter Khan was so distressed that he couldn't be consoled for hours. Others were very, very upset. Collis Featherston came back from Haifa and explained about how the House of Justice would be formed in 1963, and that they would make the decisions that had to be made at that time. So everyone sort of calmed down, but it was a pretty distressed time in the faith. Well, you see, the 10-year crusade was by then underway for 4 years, with 6 years to go. And we were supposed to get 30 assemblies. Now, at the end of the plan previous, the 6-year plan, Australia had claimed to have gotten 15 assemblies, local assemblies, but they hadn't really. What they had got was letters from believers promising to go to various parts of the country. And then they didn't all go. And so Australia was in a situation 4 years into the plan and was light years away from getting 30 assemblies, because the Guardian had said, "Well, you said you got 15, now double it." And so the goal was 30 local assemblies for the whole of Australia. Now, the only way that this could be done was if the Friends at that time had obeyed the Guardian and cut up their assembly areas to comply with local spiritual assembly areas. You take that for granted now, but in those days I'm speaking of, we just had one meeting place for the whole of Sydney, which was Piccadilly Arcade. There was a little gathering place there which was rented, and everyone was comfortable about just going to Piccadilly Arcade for the gatherings and meetings and so on. In fact, when I was accepted into the faith by the local spiritual assembly of Sydney, which was straight after I was accepted, it was disbanded, because after those 4 years, the Spiritual Assembly of Sydney was disbanded, and everyone got around to the process of forming assemblies per local spiritual assembly area. You see what I mean? Or per municipality or per shire. There were one or two that were okay. The Sutherland shire had enough believers, but most of them didn't. And because nobody had thought about those boundaries for the shires and municipalities back then. Can you imagine? You see, if you read what the Guardian has to say about the capability of local assembly administration, is not very complimentary about Australia back at that time. So we had to catch up. Now, from my point of view, there was a wonderful person who was key to bringing that about. And that was the young Peter Kahn. He had been elected to the National Spiritual Assembly as soon as he turned 21. And for a very good reason, because he was exceptionally capable. And strangely, a couple of years later, I think it was, I was put on the National Teaching Committee along with Thelma Perks and Greta Lake and Peter. And Peter was appointed as the secretary. And straight away, things started to happen. He wrote these wonderful letters to send to all the localities, send to the committees in the different states. And the process started to happen. A large part of it was that in South Australia and in Sydney, there were actually enough believers, as long as they moved, as long as they were in sensible boundaries within municipalities. So eventually I came off the National Teaching Committee and went on to the regional one so that I could try and persuade a few more people to move. And that was how, step by step, we got up to the 30. I should mention that of course, you see, they were running everything after the time of the Guardian passing, up until when the House was formed. And they asked the believers in the British Isles to send pioneers to Australia to help us. And Harry Charles, Brian Whitehead, Margaret Shanks, and my dear Sue came on ships and settled in Australia and helped to win these goals by moving into the most sensible areas. I should mention that one of the other reasons that we had a depletion of the believers, the active believers in Australia, was that so many had gone as pioneers into the Pacific, some as Knights of Bahai and some as straight pioneers, like Frank Wiss, who went to Cocos, Dulcie Dive, who went to the Cook Islands, Bertha Dobbins went to New Hebrides, Rodney Hancock to Papua New Guinea, Stanley Bolton to Tonga, Vai Hunker to Admiralty Islands. In the case of people like Vai Hunker, they went there and they stayed. Others didn't stay for long and for one reason or another came back. So I'm just looking at the time and I see that I've got to 6 o'clock. I need to wrap up, I think.
That we're going on to the World Congress.
Oh,
Hmm?
okay.
You want to go through any of the
No, wait.
pictures?
Yes, we go to the pictures soon. Why don't we do that now?
What about?
No, I'll come back to them.
Okay.
Let's start on the pictures. And if anyone wants to ask any question, they should feel free to jump in.
This is Peter Khan. Another done.
Oh, you're looking at that one. Yes. Well, that was a group of young people. I'm over on the far left because I'd just gone to that summer school in 1956. As I said, that's the end of 56 is when that picture was taken.
I'm the little girl right in the front, David.
Yes, you are, my dear.
And my three sisters are there behind Mother Dunn.
That's
Oh,
right.
lovely.
Indeed, they are.
Mm.
Is your brother not there as well?
No,
Oh, okay.
not there. And next to Ian Walker, Hugh's brother, is there on the far right at the back.
Yes,
Ian
yes,
Walker.
yes.
Then it's Mel Muller. Then it's Hugh, John Handley, my sister. And the next fellow, I think he was a lead writer, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think so. Look like
Lead
I think
writer.
it's quite remarkable that we have in our session tonight, we have Hugh and Ian online with us. We have Elizabeth online with us.
wow.
Wow.
Quite
Great,
remarkable. And Mariette.
great.
Years later or more. This is 56.
Okay, go on, next one.
Next one. Now that's the on the left. The gentleman with the hat is the first Australian believer, and he's walking along with
Oswald Whittaker.
that's Oswald Whittaker with his daughter, and that's Jim Heggie, a young Jim Heggie on his right. You can see by Jim's build that he's a pretty muscular chap. He'd come from Canada. He was an axeman, and he had a good physique. I don't know anything more about Whittaker except that Oswald Whittaker, except that he was the first Bahai. I didn't, of course, meet him. Can you get to the next picture? Now, you know this chap. That's the young Peter Khan and his older, in later years. This was the person that really, from my point of view, this is just my own opinion, rescued the Australian community and got us through to the end of the 10-year crusade. He had a remarkable mind, and he just could pick anything out of his head and know what to say, what to plan, and all the rest of it. Can we see another one? Okay. Now that's, sorry?
This is a national convention.
That's a national convention, I
at
think.
Tulang Road.
Tulang Road in the
Elmer?
background.
Velma and Greta.
Oh, yes. Well, over on the left, at the back, is Fred Grant, who was the first Jewish believer in Australia. And next to him is Greta Lake. And you probably know all these people yourselves, do you? Anyone? And Effie Baker, can you see her?
If you like, I can zoom in.
Oh, no, it's all right. Okay, try,
No,
yes. if you
zoom
can.
into where?
Well, the middle.
Middle.
I think that's a Ville de Reed, isn't it?
Yes.
Velma.
Thelma,
Madge.
I can't point. I don't know how to point to them.
You can. Where do you want me to put the mouse?
Oh, let me have
Yeah.
it then.
Madge.
There's Madge Featherstone, yes.
Okay, this one.
And
Velma.
here's Thelma Perks.
Yeah.
She was on the National Teaching Committee.
Noel Blewett.
Noel Blewett, yes.
Frank Cobb.
Frank Kahn.
Yeah.
Bessie Walker down below. Percy Oman, wasn't it? And there's Margaret's mum. Pam Ringwood down the bottom, who went to New Zealand, passed away there.
David, can I challenge you with a specific question? Because there's so many people in that photo, and given the time, I did
Yes,
Don't have
yes.
enough time.
You're right.
Whether you have any memories of Shapur and Manira Saheli, who are in the front of that photo over to the left.
Well, yes. just that I met them. They went overseas later on. I think I met them again in America somewhere. But they were, to my knowledge, one of the first to get into Australia. To be actually allowed, I think Margaret Blewett helped organise them into coming to Australia. Now you can see Joy Stevenson a little bit to the right of them. And there's my little Sharon down the bottom on the left. Anything else?
Can we make another
Next
photo?
one.
Yeah, yeah. You see, at that time, the temple was being built, and I was climbing all over it.
Next one.
Next one.
Next one.
There's some of the work being done to render the surfaces. So this all happened during my early years. Keep going.
Next one.
Next one.
Yeah. It's still not complete, see?
Still not finished, that's right. But it's starting to look a bit more like the temple we know.
And this was the visitor center in the front there.
That became
This
that,
is the
yes.
visitor center now. Yeah.
Next one. Now there's one of the pioneers. That's Dulcie Dive, who went to the Cook Islands. And
Go on, next one.
next one, and there's Frank Wiss. He
Focus.
went to Cocos, and he was a knight of Baha'u'llah for Cocos, but he could only stay there for a couple of weeks because the fellow that was running the place threw him out. But Frank, to his great credit, pioneered then to rebel in Papua New Guinea. And that's where I knew him. And that's Greta Lamprell from the Society Islands, wasn't it?
Yep.
She had to come and go. She had to fly there and then come back. And there's the redoubtable Violet Hunker, who was a Bahai, a knight of Baha'u'llah to the Admiralty Islands in Papua New Guinea. The Guardian used to go by the geographical names, and the Admiralty Islands was right up north. Now, goodness me. You can see quite a few of the pioneers and knights of Baha'u'llah in that photograph. That's Lillian Wiss, who's standing next to Vihonka. Sorry?
Robin, what? Yeah.
Yes.
And Rodney,
There's Rodney
Hancock.
Hancock over near the right. Yeah. That's, I think in the background is Sydney headquarters, isn't it? The Lang Road? I think so.
Next one.
That is
Next
correct.
picture.
I think that's
Now there's Jim Hickey on the left at the back.
NSA of Australia and New Zealand.
Oh, this is the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Australia and New Zealand. That's why you've got Alvin Blum in there from, and there's Dulcie Dive. You see, back at that time, it was one assembly for the two countries before it was divided, and New Zealand and Australia got their own national assemblies.
Yeah, Mrs. Blum is there too.
Mrs. Blum is there.
Mrs. Blum.
Ah, yes, yes, there.
Next
And there's
to
young Stanley Bolton.
And Jim Heggie.
Jim Higgie's on the top left. Dulcie Dive. Lillian Wiss from Samoa. Thank you. Oh, there's all the names there. Good. Got them right.
Next one.
Next one. See, some of these dear Baha'is, they had to come and go from their pioneering post because they weren't allowed to stay there. So they would travel there and have to come back and then travel back again. Next picture. That's Bertha Dobbins with her school in the New Hebrides, as it was called then. The next one.
That's 1969.
1969, is it? Oh, wow. That's it. Yeah, there you are, the names. And now we've jumped forward to the World Congress, and Uncle Fred Murray, the Aborigine Bahai, at the Congress. Ruhir Khanum really looked after him, kept him around. And this is pictures of people outside. I went to that. That's how some of the crowd outside. And there's the inside one, the wonderful time when the members of the House of Justice stood there and a speech from the House, an address from the House was read out by David Hoffman.
Yeah, Meg had just passed away.
Yeah. So.
This one?
Yeah.
You said you wanted to go to this one at the end.
Yes. Well, you see, coinciding with the end of the crusade, my dear Meg suddenly passed away. She had a heart condition, but when she died, nobody knew why. People didn't think you could die from a miscarriage, but there was an inquest held, and the inquest called for a medical person to be present, and he explained that yes, it was rare, but it was well known, and that if you had a sudden loss of blood because of a miscarriage, it could occasionally cause the heart to stop in a state of shock. And from that state of shock, the heart didn't recover. And so I was actually at the inquest, obviously, and that's the first time I knew how dear Meg had passed away. Nobody had explained it to me before that. So I was grateful for the inquest to finally clear that up for me. So that's a sad memory. But as you can see, this gathering includes Sue, because at the end of the crusade, as I explained, the Baha'is were running short, and the Hands of the Cause said that England or British Isles should help. And I think I explained how there were those 4 people that came out to Australia, and Sue was one of them, and that's her there at the bottom. Draw a picture. There you are. That she is. Well, look, thank you.
Yes, I was able to come because Meg was a lawyer and she had a business in Sydney and she could sponsor me.
That's right.
So I had a job to go to.
Okay.
Anyway,
And Sue, thank you so much for sharing those very precious memories. They're very personal to you, and they're very precious to you, but it's been our privilege tonight to listen to you recalling those from so long ago, and also thinking, as you have been talking about your experience from the 50s, but thinking of your service to the communities in Australia and the Pacific and at the World Centre in all those years since then. So thank you so much for sharing that. Perhaps there might be 1 or 2 questions before we
Yeah, sure.
speaker. So if anybody would like to ask David a question, about his experience in these early years of the faith in Australia, this is the time to do so. We'll have one or two questions before we move on.
Graham, could I ask a question, please?
Go ahead, Ovid.
David, if I could ask how Meg became a Bahai.
How Meg became a Bahai.
Oh, that was in 1948. And I think she was, I think Evilda Reid taught her, but I'm not quite sure. It might have been another Bahai that was involved in broadcasting. If anyone can help me with that name.
Oh, that's very interesting because the name is Ethel Dorr.
Yes, that's right. I think she was taught by Ethel Dorr. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Do we have any other questions?
I had a question, David.
Go ahead, Erica.
Yeah, for David. Just what's the date on that summer school photo?
What's the date?
I
What year
think
is
it's
it?
1961.
61. Okay.
Oh, that one,
Well,
yes.
it probably was. My parents, of course, are there. My father's there sitting next to Meg, and my mother is in the Joe Salter sitting next to Meg, and Lorna Salter is
Right.
standing there. So, and they became Baha'is in the middle of 62.
Yeah,
And
no, I think it's 62, not 61.
oh, you think so? I
Yeah,
mean, they could have
61,
gone.
61 is the other picture. 62 is the Summe School.
Okay, right. Okay. Well,
The point is that they are there, Erica. That's the point.
they are there. That's the point. Yeah.
And
But
we hope that in the future you'll give a presentation about your parents. It would be very entertaining. Now, David, do you have any memories of Joe and Lorna Salter that you can share with us?
Oh, certainly. Joe was a right character, and I enjoyed his company. He had a very strong sense of humour. Now, John Davidson can help me with that. I can see him smiling away in the background.
He was the life of the Summe School.
I have his house.
I thought that was a charming description, David.
Okay. No, I enjoyed his company.
He's a wonderful
Graham.
person.
I have his
I
house.
have question. Sorry, I have question.
Yes, yes.
Yes, Olia has a question, and we will finish this session soon. Olia, please go ahead.
Okay. David, I would like to know what was the relationship that time Baha'i community with governor and with the media, because that time maybe it was little bit strange for your friend, even family, when you were Baha'i. You know, it was not familiar to the people. I want to know, did you have any connection, relationship with the governor, you know, media? I want to know.
Certainly.
Take me to that, that stage. Thank you.
For 3 years, I was the national secretary, and I was living up in the national office in that vicinity.
Yeah.
And you may remember there were some incidents where the national government was worried that we might be attacked, that our temple might be attacked.
All right.
Because somebody had thrown stones over the, you know, there was a time, but it was not really directed at the faith. It was more a sort of some thinking that was current in Sydney. Now, that's all right. So the ASIO rang me up and asked me about it, and we had a bit of a yarn, and I found them very very friendly and wanting to know whether we were concerned or not. And then it was suddenly gone. It didn't come back.
Thank you. But,
Not much help, I'm sorry.
yeah, no, you suffered like Baha'is in Iran, because when that time
Oh, no, nothing
was
like
for
that.
them strange.
Nothing like that.
Not exactly same situation, but still,
Mm.
it was for freedom.
Well, I thought it was helpful that they rang up, you know, they wanted to know how we were taking it.
Yeah.
Mm.
And they have a good opinion of the Baha'is.
Yeah, they did.
Mm.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Well, friends, thank you for those questions. And David and Sue, once again, thank you for the presentation tonight.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
If we can all show our appreciation by...
Yeah,
Of course, was wonderful. Thank you.
there's a connection with you, Graham. There's a connection with you. Because you and my daughter Sharon were living next door to each other at one stage. How old were you then?
About 3 to 4 years old, David, and time well.
Right.
Haven't ever forgotten. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Right.